In the quiet courtyard of a small rural school in Oregon, a no-nonsense principal named Richard Coleman gave the order to remove a beloved statue of the Virgin Mary, deeming it unsafe and outdated. The entire community pleaded with him: teachers, parents, even the janitor who had tended it for decades. But Richard, a man who trusted only facts and liability forms, would not budge. What happened next, in the days and nights that followed, would shake the town to its core, revealing the gentle yet mighty intercession of the Mother of God in ways no one could have foreseen, proving once again that her love reaches even the most closed hearts. Before we continue, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Let's see how far the miracles of the Virgin Mary have reached. And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. Richard Coleman was 52, principal of Willow Creek Elementary for nearly 15 years, the kind of man whose decisions carried the weight of finality. In rural Oregon, where small towns cling to traditions amid vast forests and rolling hills, schools like Willow Creek served as community anchors, places where generations learned not just academics, but values rooted in faith and family. Richard ran his with efficiency, budgets balanced, rules enforced, progress measured in test scores and safety reports. He wasn't cruel, far from it, but practical to a fault, emotions secondary to logic. The statue stood in the central courtyard, a fixture since 1947 when the school expanded after World War II, a gift from parishioners of the nearby Catholic Church honoring veterans and peacetime hope. 6.5 feet tall on its concrete pedestal, the Virgin Mary extended arms in welcome, blue mantle faded by decades of Pacific Northwest rain and sun, a crack tracing her side like a gentle scar. Moss softened the base's edges, roses planted by devoted hands blooming faithfully each spring. Children passed it daily, some pausing to touch the hem or leave flowers. Teachers began assemblies there on feast days. In American Catholic schools, especially in rural areas with strong immigrant roots, such statues serve as quiet teachers. Mary as model of motherhood, mercy, protection. Richard walked past it multiple times daily for years, barely registering its presence until that October Tuesday. Pausing during rounds, he noted the crack wider, pedestal leaning subtly, moss indicating instability. Liability flashed in his mind: lawsuits from falls, insurance premiums, district scrutiny. Practicality demanded action. George Mitchell, 71, the janitor who had served since Richard's own student days, swept nearby. White hair, hands trembling slightly from age, yet never missing work. "George," Richard called. The older man straightened. "Yes, Mr. Coleman? This statue. How long has the crack been there?" George glanced fondly. 5 years or so, after that big windstorm. Base always leaned a bit. Richard circled, pushing gently, wobble confirmed. "Dangerous. Child gets hurt. We're liable." "But Mr. Coleman, she's been here since," George began. "1947, I know. Time for restoration or removal." George offered to clean and stabilize. Richard dismissed it. Specialists needed, costs high. Decision made. Removal scheduled. Word spread swiftly in the tight-knit town. Parents upset, teachers pleading. Margaret Hayes, veteran third-grade instructor and parish leader, confronting him directly. "Richard, that statue is part of us. Generations prayed there." Petitions circulated, calls flooded the office. Richard held firm. Safety first. No sentiment overriding reason to eye in rural American communities, especially with Catholic heritage from European settlers. Such statues often embody collective memory, protection through storms literal and figurative. Richard saw only risk. Crews arrived quietly one dawn, chains and crane ready. Community watched from fences, George standing silent, eyes misty. As straps encircled the figure, something shifted, not physically, but in the air, a hush deeper than morning quiet. The removal of the Virgin Mary statue from the central courtyard of Willow Creek Elementary became the talk of the small Oregon town almost immediately. By noon the next day, whispers had turned to open conversation in the grocery store, the post office, and the pews of the local Catholic parish. Parents who had sent generations of children to the school felt a sense of loss that was hard to explain to outsiders. The statue had never been merely decoration. For many, It had been a quiet companion, something to glance at during morning drop-off, a place to pause for a second before walking inside, a silent reminder that grace could be found even in the ordinary rush of school mornings. Richard Coleman stood firm. He had scheduled the removal for the following Monday, early enough to avoid too many witnesses, late enough to give the maintenance crew time to prepare. The pedestal would be removed entirely, the statue stored in the district warehouse until a proper restoration could be funded, or until someone donated the money to make it happen. He wrote a brief memo to staff. Safety is our top priority. The statue will be professionally restored and returned when structurally sound. The memo was polite, professional, and entirely without feeling. George Mitchell, the 71-year-old janitor who had swept around that statue every morning for nearly 50 years, read the memo in the break room and said nothing. He simply folded the paper, placed it in his pocket, and went back to sweeping the hallways. But his hands shook more than usual that day. George had been the one to plant the rose bushes around the base when he was still young and strong. He had repainted the blue mantle every few years, carefully matching the original shade. When the crack first appeared after a windstorm in 2018, he had filled it with epoxy and prayed over it, as though the statue were a living thing that could be comforted. To George, it was. Margaret Hayes, the third-grade teacher who had taught at Willow Creek for 28 years, did not stay silent. She organized a small meeting after school in her classroom. About 15 teachers and staff members came. They wrote a letter, respectful but firm, asking Richard to reconsider. They reminded him that the statue had stood through every generation of students, that it had been a source of comfort during difficult years, that its removal would be felt deeply by the community. They offered to raise funds for restoration themselves. They signed it, one by one, some with tears in their eyes. Richard received the letter the next morning. He read it in his office, the door closed. He felt the weight of their words, but he also felt the weight of his responsibility. He had seen the pedestal wobble when he pushed it. He had imagined a child running, a fall, a lawsuit, headlines. In rural school districts like this one, where budgets are tight and legal fees can cripple a system, liability is not abstract. It is real. That he called the district superintendent. "We have to remove it," he said. "I can't take the risk." The superintendent sighed. "Do what you have to do, but be prepared for backlash." The backlash came swiftly. Petitions circulated at the grocery store and the parish. Parents wrote emails. A local newspaper ran a small article. Community divided over school statue removal. Richard's inbox filled with messages, some angry, some heartbroken, a few threatening. He read them all, replied to none. That Friday evening, Richard drove to his father's house in Salem, about an hour away. His father, Harold, 78, had been having chest pains for weeks. Richard had been trying to get him to the doctor, but Harold was stubborn. "I'm fine," he would say. "Just old." Richard had brought groceries, stayed for dinner, tried to convince him to make an appointment. Harold waved him off, as always on Saturday morning. While Richard was making coffee in his father's kitchen, Harold collapsed. Clutching his chest, he slid to the floor, gasping. Richard dropped to his knees, dialing 911, performing CPR with the precision of someone who had taken the course more times than he could count. The ambulance arrived quickly. The ride to the hospital was silent except for the sirens and Harold's labored breathing. The hospital, the doctor was blunt. "Heart attack. Blockage severe. Surgery needed immediately." Richard sat in the waiting room, hands shaking, praying the only prayer he remembered from childhood. "Hail Mary, full of grace." He hadn't said those words in decades. They came now, automatic, desperate. In the quiet of the waiting room, under the fluorescent lights, something happened that Richard would never fully explain. He felt warmth, sudden, gentle, spreading through his chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. The scent of roses filled the sterile air, faint but unmistakable. And then he saw her, a woman standing in the hallway, robed in white with a deep blue mantle, her face radiant with compassion. She looked directly at him, then pointed toward the ICU doors. Richard stood, legs unsteady, and walked. He found a nurse, asked about his father's oxygen line. The nurse checked and gasped. The tube had kinked, cutting off flow. She adjusted it immediately. Within minutes, Harold's oxygen levels stabilized, color returning to his face. The doctor later called it critical timing. Richard knew it was something more. He returned to the waiting room, alone, trembling. The woman was gone, but the warmth remained, and the scent of roses lingered for several minutes. Richard sat, head in hands, and wept, not from fear, but from a realization too large for words. That night, he made a decision. The statue would not be removed. It would be restored, quietly, at his own expense if necessary, and he would be the one to do it. The days following the statue's removal settled over Willow Creek Elementary like a heavy fog rolling in from the Oregon coast, muting colors and quieting voices in a community that had always prided itself on its close-knit warmth. The courtyard, once a vibrant heart where children gathered for recess and assemblies began with a glance toward Mary's welcoming arms, now felt starkly empty. The concrete pedestal a bare scar against the grass, mossy remnants the only trace of what had stood there for nearly 8 decades. Parents lingered longer at drop-off, eyes drawn to the void. Teachers passed with subdued greetings, the usual morning chatter replaced by hushed conversations about what Richard's thinking. Margaret Hayes, the third-grade teacher whose classroom windows overlooked the courtyard, felt the loss most acutely. For 28 years, she had begun each day pausing at the statue, fingertips brushing the blue mantle, a silent prayer for her students, for patience, for grace in the small chaos of young lives. In rural Catholic schools like Willow Creek, rooted in traditions brought by European settlers to the Pacific Northwest, such statues served as quiet catechists, Mary teaching without words the virtues of humility, motherhood, protection. Margaret had shared stories with classes, how Mary at Cana interceded quietly, how at Guadalupe she appeared to the humble Juan Diego. The statue's absence left a silence louder than any lesson. George Mitchell swept the empty space daily, broom moving slower, as if reluctant to erase the last traces. 71 years old, hands trembling more from emotion than age, he had tended the roses with devotion, repainting the mantle when faded, filling cracks with care. "She's been here longer than me," he told Margaret one afternoon, voice thick. Watched over generations. Petitions grew, hundreds of signatures from parents, alumni, even former students now adults with children of their own. Letters poured into Richard's office. Heartfelt pleas, memories of prayers answered, warnings of community fracture. Richard read them all in the privacy of his office, door closed against the tension-filling hallways. Practicality warred with something new, a niggling unease he dismissed as sentiment. Liability remained clear, the wobble, the crack, potential harm. Yet nights brought restlessness, the empty pedestal haunting dreams. His father Harold's health worried him too. Chest pains dismissed as indigestion, doctor's visit postponed. "I'm fine," Harold insisted over phone calls. Richard, ever logical, scheduled one anyway. That Friday evening, driving to Salem for the weekend visit, Richard's mind replayed the courtyard, George's disappointed eyes, Margaret's quiet plea. Practicality had always served him. Career advanced through decisions others shied from. School improved under his efficiency. Faith, a comfort for others. Karen's domain in their marriage long ended. Childhood masses distant memory. Yet something stirred, faint as winter's first frost. Saturday morning in Harold's kitchen, coffee brewing. The call came not from worry but crisis. Harold clutching chest, collapsing. Richard dropped everything. CPR trained, but never used on family. Hands steady despite terror, ambulance summoned. The ride blurred, sirens wailing through rural highways. Harold's breathing labored. Hospital waiting room, sterile lights, antiseptic scent, endless minutes. Richard paced, guilt surfacing. Father's stubbornness mirrored his own. Visit postponed too long. Prayer unpracticed rose haltingly. Hail Mary. Words from childhood returning like old friends. Then warmth, sudden, enveloping, defying the chill. Rose scent bloomed impossibly, sweet amid sterility. Vision clear, woman in blue mantle, face radiant compassion, pointing urgently toward ICU. Richard followed instinctively, finding nurse. Check his oxygen. Faulty tube kinked, adjusted instantly, levels stabilizing. Doctor later. Seconds more, irreversible. Richard returned to waiting, trembling. Presence faded, roses lingering. Not coincidence. Grace, maternal, insistent, father recovered swiftly. Extraordinary timing. Richard knew. Mary's intercession, gentle yet powerful, reaching through his doubt. Decision crystallized, statue restored, quietly, personally. The dawn that broke over Willow Creek Elementary the following Monday carried a crispness that hinted at winter's approach, the Oregon sky pale and vast above the rolling hills. Richard Coleman arrived earlier than usual, his truck rumbling into the empty parking lot, while stars still lingered faintly in the west. He had not slept much. Images of his father's collapse, the hospital's sterile lights, the impossible warmth and rose scent replaying in his mind. The decision crystallized in those sleepless hours. The statue would return, restored not by committee or budget, but by his own hand and resources. He worked alone under the first gray light, unloading tools from his truck, cement mix, level, paint carefully matched to the original faded blue. The pedestal's base, removed days earlier, waited in storage. Richard retrieved it quietly, muscles straining as he maneuvered the heavy concrete back into place. Leveling it with precision born of practical life, he poured fresh mix to secure it firmly. No wobble now, no risk. The statue itself, stored safely, he lifted with reverence unexpected even to himself. 6.5 feet of weathered stone, Mary's arms open as always. Positioning her atop the renewed pedestal felt like atonement. Richard smoothed the cracks with filler, repainted the mantle in soft azure, touching up details with care he had never shown before. Roses, fresh cuttings from a local nursery, were planted anew around the base, their roots taking hold in enriched soil. By the time the sun crested the hills, the courtyard transformed. The Virgin Mary standing sentinel once more, serene face catching golden light, as if she had never left. George Mitchell arrived first, broom in hand for morning rounds. He stopped at the gate, eyes widening at the sight, statue restored, pedestal solid, roses budding defiantly. "Mr. Coleman," he whispered, voice thick. Richard, wiping hands on a rag, met his gaze. "She belongs here, George. Always did." George approached slowly, touching the base gently, tears tracing weathered cheeks. "Thank you," he managed. Richard nodded, words unnecessary between men who understood labor and loss. Margaret Hayes arrived next, coffee in hand for early prep. She paused mid-step, breath catching. "Richard, you..." He shrugged, almost shy. Couldn't let it stay empty. Margaret's eyes misted. She embraced him briefly, the gesture speaking volumes in a community where touch carried weight. Words spread swiftly, teachers gathering, parents at drop-off lingering in awe. Children ran to the courtyard, fingers tracing the smooth repairs, wonder lighting young faces. The Richard's father Harold recovered swiftly. Extraordinary timing. Doctors repeated. The kinked oxygen tubes discovery credited to instinct. Discharged before Christmas, he joined the family table, vitality returning like spring after frost. "You look different, son," Harold observed one evening. Richard smiled faintly. "Learn some things are more important than being right." The statue endured, a quiet beacon. No dramatic signs, yet peace settled over Willow Creek. Richard paused there daily, morning glance, afternoon reflection, gratitude unspoken but profound. Faith, once irrelevant, now whispered in his practical heart. Mary's gentle intercession, reaching through doubt to remind that grace restores what pride removes. In rural communities like this, where Catholic roots run deep from pioneer days, statues become living history, protectors through storms, witnesses to generations. Richard understood now. Some things defy liability forms, existing in realms reason alone cannot measure. The years that followed the quiet restoration of the Virgin Mary statue in Willow Creek Elementary's courtyard wove themselves into the fabric of the small Oregon town like threads of light through a familiar tapestry. Richard Coleman, once the principal whose decisions brooked no argument, now moved through his days with a gentleness that surprised even those who knew him best. The courtyard became a place of gathering beyond school hours. Parents lingering after drop-off to share coffee on benches Richard had added. Children playing where the pedestal stood firm and safe. Roses blooming more vibrantly each season as if rewarded for their patience. Margaret Hayes retired a few years later. Her classroom passed to a young teacher who continued the tradition of beginning assemblies with a glance toward Mary's open arms. George Mitchell swept the paths until his hands could no longer hold the broom steadily, passing the duty to a grateful successor with stories of the statue's long watch. The school thrived. Test scores solid, community strong. The empty space that once scarred the courtyard, now a memory softened by time and grace. Richard's father Harold lived to see 90, sharp until the end, often joking that a little divine intervention goes a long way. Family gatherings grew warmer, holidays at the old house, Richard present in ways ambition once precluded. He never spoke publicly of the hospital vision, the warmth, roses, her pointing gesture, but carried it privately, a secret flame guiding quieter choices. Funds anonymously donated for restorations, time given to listening rather than directing. One Christmas Eve years later, snow falling soft as forgiveness, Richard stood in the courtyard alone after the school pageant. Children had reenacted the nativity with wide-eyed wonder, Mary's role played by a shy girl who now touched the statue's hem in thanks. Lights twinkled on the trees he had planted, the scene peaceful under starlit sky. Richard paused before the figure, cracks filled, mantle bright, arms extended as always. "Thank you," he whispered, voice carrying in the hush. No scent of roses came, no vision, but peace settled deep. Affirmation enough in rural communities like Willow Creek, where Catholic roots from pioneer days endure amid forests and fields. Miracles often unfold quietly, a statue spared, a heart softened, grace multiplying through ordinary lives. Richard understood now. Mary's intercession seeks the practical, the doubting, gentle guidance when pride blinds, mercy when guilt weighs heaviest. The statue stands still, welcoming generations. Children leaving flowers, parents pausing in prayer, the town finding in her open arms reminder that no decision is final, no heart beyond reach. Richard retired eventually, succeeded by one who honored traditions anew. Yet he visited often, sitting on a bench, watching life unfold where emptiness once reigned. Some miracles thunder, others whisper through restored stone and renewed souls. Coincidences only to those who forget heaven's patient love. In Grecio's spirit, Willow Creek learned, grace restores what practicality removes. Light fills where shadows lingered. Before we finish, I invite you to join our prayer community dedicated to the Virgin Mary, a worldwide family sharing testimonies of her maternal care. If this story has touched your heart, click below to subscribe and become part of our chain of prayer. And if you followed Richard's journey to the end, please write in the comments, "Roses," the scent that changed everything in that early morning. Let us witness together how many souls have been reached by this testament to Mary's enduring miracles. Share this video with someone needing hope today. May Our Lady bless and protect you and your family always. Amen.